New Guinea, 1943. The island was hell on earth, dense jungle, suffocating humidity, disease everywhere, malaria, dysentery, dengue fever, and starvation. Japanese forces had been cut off from supply lines for 3 months. No food shipments, no medical supplies, no ammunition. American submarines and aircraft had made resupply impossible. The Japanese garrison on New Guinea, approximately 20,000 soldiers, was slowly dying. Private Hiroshi Yamada was 24 years old. He'd been stationed on New Guinea since early 1942. Back then, the Japanese advance seemed unstoppable. They'd conquered Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. Victory seemed certain. Now, in late 1943, Hiroshi weighed maybe 90 pounds. His uniform hung loose on his skeletal frame. His teeth were loose from scurvy. His hands shook constantly from malnutrition. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in 6 weeks. The Japanese military ration was supposed to provide 2,500 calories per day. Rice, pickled vegetables, dried fish, miso soup. But those rations required supply ships, and supply ships couldn't reach New Guinea anymore. Hiroshi's unit was down to 200 grams of rice per day, about 1 cup, split among 5 men. That was maybe 150 calories per person. A human needs 2,000 calories minimum to survive. At 150 calories per day, the body begins consuming itself. First, the body burns fat. But soldiers in the jungle had no fat left. Then the body burns muscle. Then organs begin failing. Then death. Hiroshi watched men die every day, not from combat, from starvation. They'd become too weak to move, too weak to fetch water. They'd lie down in the jungle and never get up. By November 1943, something changed in the Japanese garrison. Something terrible. Corpses started disappearing. At first, Hiroshi thought animals were taking them, wild pigs, monitor lizards. The jungle consumed everything eventually. But then he noticed something else. Some soldiers, not many but some, seemed healthier than they should be. Not starving as quickly as everyone else, moving with more energy, their eyes less hollow. One night Hiroshi was too weak to sleep. Hunger does that. It gnaws at you constantly, makes rest impossible. He heard sounds, quiet sounds, careful sounds, men moving through the camp at night. Hiroshi forced himself to sit up, to look. In the darkness, he saw 3 soldiers from another unit. They were carrying something wrapped in cloth, something heavy. They were being very quiet, very secretive. Hiroshi should have ignored it, should have laid back down. But curiosity, or maybe delirium from starvation, made him follow. The 3 soldiers went to an abandoned position, a foxhole that had been empty since the previous week. They unwrapped what they were carrying. Hiroshi saw it, saw what they had, what they were preparing to cook over a small fire. It was a human leg. Hiroshi stumbled backward, made a noise. The 3 soldiers looked up, saw him. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then one of the soldiers, a corporal, gaunt and hollow-eyed, said quietly, "We're starving. Command has abandoned us. This is survival." Hiroshi ran, or tried to run. His weakened body could barely walk, but he moved away as fast as he could. He told no one what he'd seen. Because what was there to say? What could anyone do? They were all starving. They were all dying. And some had decided that survival required the unthinkable. This was happening across the Pacific, on dozens of islands, in hundreds of isolated Japanese garrisons, cut off, forgotten, starving, and some were crossing a line that should never be crossed. What Hiroshi witnessed wasn't isolated. It wasn't just a few desperate soldiers making horrific choices. It was systematic, organized. In some Japanese units, it became semi-official policy. Lieutenant Colonel Masanobu Tsuji was a Japanese staff officer who served in the Pacific. After the war, during war crimes trials, evidence emerged about his role in some of the most horrific aspects of Japanese military practice. Tsuji had issued orders, written orders, to troops cut off on certain islands. The orders were explicit. If food supplies are exhausted, soldiers are authorized to consume the flesh of enemy dead. Japanese dead are to be buried with honor. Enemy dead may be used for sustenance. These weren't rogue soldiers making desperate choices. This was military policy, documented, written down, distributed to units. On the island of Chichijima, a small island in the Pacific, Japanese garrison commander Major Sueo Matoba ordered the execution of captured American airmen. But the executions weren't just for military purposes. The Americans' bodies were butchered. The meat was distributed to officers as food. This was documented in post-war trials. Multiple Japanese officers testified. They didn't deny it. They explained it as military necessity, as survival in impossible conditions. One officer, Captain Yoshi, testified, "We had no food. Supply ships could not reach us. We were ordered to hold the island at all costs. American prisoners were going to die anyway, either by execution or starvation. Using their bodies for food seemed logical, given our circumstances." The tribunal judge asked, "Did you consider this morally acceptable?" Captain Yoshi paused, then said, "No, but I considered survival more important than morality. My men were dying. I had orders to maintain the garrison. What would you have done?" The question hung in the air, because it revealed something fundamental about what was happening in the Pacific War. Japanese military doctrine emphasized absolute obedience. Surrender was dishonorable. Retreat without orders was execution-worthy. Soldiers were expected to fight until death or until they won. But what happens when soldiers are abandoned, when supply lines are cut, when no reinforcements are coming, when starvation kills more men than combat? Some units chose death. Officers and soldiers starved together, maintaining honor until the end. These units left behind diaries documenting their final days, entries growing weaker, handwriting becoming illegible, final entries often just dates, then nothing. Other units chose survival at any cost. These units also left documentation, but their documentation was different. It was hidden, destroyed when possible, and after the war, many soldiers never spoke about what they'd done. Hiroshi's unit fell somewhere in between. Most soldiers starved, some died fighting, and a few, maybe 10 or 15 men out of 200, survived by crossing lines they'd never imagined crossing. Hiroshi survived by eating jungle plants, insects, tree bark, anything with calories. He got dysentery so bad he should have died, but somehow he lived. He was eventually captured by Australian forces in early 1944. During his captivity, Australian interrogators asked about conditions on New Guinea. Hiroshi told them everything, about the starvation, about watching men die, about the rumors of cannibalism. The interrogator, an Australian officer, asked, "Did you participate in cannibalism?" Hiroshi said, "No, I never could, but I don't judge the men who did. They were abandoned by their command. They were starving. People do terrible things when they're dying. I would have died before doing what they did, but I can't say they were wrong. I can only say I couldn't do it." The interrogator made notes, then asked another question. "Did your officers know about the cannibalism?" "Yes," Hiroshi said. "Everyone knew. Nobody talked about it, but everyone knew." "And the officers allowed it?" Hiroshi thought carefully. The officers were starving too. Some participated. Some looked away. Some tried to stop it, but couldn't enforce discipline because everyone was too weak. Command structure breaks down when everyone is dying. While Japanese troops were starving on Pacific Islands, American forces were eating better than they'd eaten in civilian life. This wasn't propaganda. It was logistics. The U.S. military had developed a comprehensive food supply system that prioritized keeping soldiers fed under any circumstances. The system had three components: rations, supply chains, and airdrops. K-rations were standard field rations. Each K-ration contained one canned meat unit, ham, pork or beef, crackers or biscuits, dried fruit bar, candy, usually chocolate or hard candy, instant coffee, sugar tablets, cigarettes, chewing gum, toilet paper. Total calories, approximately 3,000 per day, enough to maintain a soldier's weight and strength during sustained combat. American soldiers complained about C-Rations. They called them monotonous, boring, unappetizing. They joked that the K stood for killed because eating them felt like death. But they never starved. Ever. No American unit in World War II was abandoned without food supplies. Rations were better. Canned meals that could be heated, beef stew, chicken, vegetables, fruit cocktail, pound cake, real coffee. American soldiers complained about C-Rations too. They said the beef stew tasted like dog food, the vegetables were mushy, the pound cake was dry, but it was food, abundant food, reliable food. Food that arrived every day without fail. Hot meals were served whenever possible. In rear areas, mess halls operated 24/7. In forward areas, field kitchens provided hot meals at least once a day. Thanksgiving, 1943. American troops in the Pacific received turkey dinner, real turkey, with stuffing, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, served on actual plates in field mess tents. Christmas, 1943. American forces received special holiday rations, extra candy, cigars instead of cigarettes, canned ham, fruitcake. A Marine Corporal, James Mitchell, wrote home in December 1943, "Mom, you won't believe this. We're on Tarawa, fought one of the bloodiest battles of the war here last month. Still cleaning up, still burying dead. But last night the Navy brought us turkey dinner, turkey, on a Pacific island, in a war zone. I ate until I thought I'd burst. Then they brought out ice cream. Ice cream. I don't understand how they do it, but God bless America for feeding us this well." The ice cream wasn't a joke. The US Navy had specially designed concrete barges floating ice cream factories that could produce 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes. These barges traveled with the fleet, providing ice cream to sailors and Marines throughout the Pacific. Japanese intelligence intercepted reports about American food supplies. They thought it was propaganda. Exaggeration meant to demoralize Japanese troops. It wasn't propaganda. It was real. But the most remarkable aspect of American food logistics was the airdrop system. When American units were cut off or operating in areas where ground supply was impossible, the Army Air Force dropped supplies by parachute. The system was sophisticated. Supply drops included food rations, C-Rations and C-Rations, water in special containers, ammunition, medical supplies, mail from home, cigarettes, candy, newspapers. The drops were accurate. Pilots trained specifically for supply missions. They could hit drop zones as small as 50 meters square from altitudes of 500 feet. In December 1943, American paratroopers were operating behind Japanese lines in Burma. They'd been cut off for 2 weeks. No ground supply route, no way to resupply except by air. Every day, C-47 transport aircraft flew over their position and dropped supplies. Food, ammunition, medicine, everything the paratroopers needed to continue operating. A paratrooper, Lieutenant William Chang, wrote in his diary, "Day 14 behind enemy lines. Running low on ammunition, but food is fine. Supply drop came this morning, right on target. C-Rations, coffee, chocolate bars, cigarettes. Also got letters from home. Mail call in the middle of enemy territory. This is the most American thing I've ever experienced." The Japanese never developed equivalent supply drop capabilities. Japanese transport aircraft were few, pilots weren't trained for precision drops. And by 1943, Japanese air forces didn't control enough airspace to conduct regular supply missions. Japanese units that were cut off stayed cut off. They starved, they died, or they resorted to measures that broke every code of military conduct. In February 1944, American forces surrounded a Japanese position on Bougainville. The Japanese garrison, about 5,000 soldiers, was trapped. No supply line, no hope of reinforcement. American commanders expected the Japanese to surrender. They dropped leaflets offering terms: surrender and receive food, water, medical care, and humane treatment as POWs. The Japanese refused. Their commander, Colonel Isao Kusunoshi, sent a message to Japanese command: "We will fight to the last man. We will not dishonor ourselves through surrender." American forces didn't storm the position. They surrounded it and waited. They knew starvation would eventually force a decision. Meanwhile, American soldiers in the surrounding positions ate 3 hot meals a day, received regular mail, got rest rotations, had access to field hospitals. The siege lasted 11 weeks. During that time, American aircraft dropped supplies to U.S. positions daily. The Japanese watched these drops, watched American soldiers eating, watched supplies arriving like clockwork. The Japanese garrison held out until April. When American forces finally overran the position, they found 3,800 Japanese soldiers dead, most from starvation. Only 200 surrendered, and only because they were too weak to resist. American soldiers who entered the Japanese positions found evidence of cannibalism: bodies that had been butchered, bones that showed knife marks, cooking areas with human remains. A U.S. Army chaplain, Captain Robert Morrison, was among the first to enter the Japanese camp. He wrote in his report, "What we found defies description. These men had been reduced to something inhuman by starvation. They'd eaten everything: roots, insects, leather equipment, and finally each other. Meanwhile, we'd been eating turkey and ice cream half a mile away. The contrast was obscene. Not because we were eating well. We should eat well. We're soldiers fighting for our country, but because their command had abandoned them, left them to die, given them impossible orders and no support. That's the obscenity. Not what these starving men did to survive, but what their commanders did to them." Understanding why this happened requires understanding Japanese military culture in World War II. The Japanese military code, Bushido, as interpreted by 1940s militarists, emphasized several principles: loyalty to emperor above all, death before dishonor, surrender is unacceptable, obedience to orders is absolute. These principles created a military culture where soldiers would rather die than retreat without orders, where surrender was considered worse than death, where individual survival was less important than unit honor. This culture produced remarkable courage. Japanese soldiers defended positions to the last man, conducted banzai charges knowing they'd die, flew kamikaze missions. The determination was extraordinary. But this culture also produced terrible situations when combined with failed logistics. If surrender is unacceptable and orders say, "Hold this position," but no supplies arrive, soldiers face impossible choices: die of starvation, honorable; retreat without orders, dishonorable, may result in execution; surrender, ultimate dishonor; survive by any means necessary, some chose death. These soldiers maintained honor. They're remembered respectfully. Some chose unauthorized retreat. Many were caught and executed by their own military police. Some chose surrender. These soldiers were forever marked as dishonorable in Japanese society, and some chose survival through cannibalism. These soldiers rarely survived anyway. If they did survive, most never spoke about what they'd done. American military culture was completely different. American doctrine prioritized mission completion, but also force preservation. Strategic retreat was acceptable. Surrender was acceptable if no other option existed. Individual soldiers' life had value. This created a military culture where commanders were expected to keep their soldiers alive, where supply chains were as important as tactics, where no American unit would be abandoned without support. The result: American soldiers complained about food quality. Japanese soldiers died from starvation. After the war, historians interviewed Japanese veterans who'd served on isolated Pacific islands. Many were reluctant to discuss cannibalism, but some spoke honestly. Former Lieutenant Takeshi Nakamura, who served on New Guinea, said in a 1970 interview, "Americans think we were monsters, that we ate human flesh because we were savage or cruel. They don't understand. We were dying slowly, painfully. We watched our friends waste away. We had orders to hold positions but no supplies to do it. Some men chose death. I respect them. Some men chose survival. I don't judge them. I survived by eating jungle plants and insects. I was lucky. Others weren't. What they did to survive, I won't condemn them. Our command condemned us all by abandoning us." The interviewer asked, "Do you blame your commanders?" Nakamura was quiet for a long time, then said, "Yes. I blame the commanders who gave impossible orders without providing support. I blame the system that valued honor more than human life. I blame the doctrine that turned soldiers into disposable tools. Americans fed their soldiers. We were expected to feed ourselves or die trying. That's the difference. Not cultural, not racial, logistical and doctrinal. The extent of cannibalism among Japanese forces was documented extensively during war crimes trials. Not all cases were prosecuted. Many involved desperation rather than criminal intent. But some cases were clearly criminal. Chichijima Island, 1945. 8 American airmen captured after being shot down, executed by order of Major Sueo Matoba, bodies butchered and consumed by Japanese officers. Not survival cannibalism. Officers had food supplies. Matoba was convicted and executed for war crimes. New Guinea, 1943 to 1944. Approximately 200 documented cases of cannibalism, mostly involved Japanese soldiers consuming other Japanese dead. Some cases involved Allied prisoners or local natives. Most cases occurred in areas where Japanese forces were completely cut off. Australian war crimes investigators documented but rarely prosecuted cases involving Japanese dead Philippines, 1944-1945. Multiple reports of Japanese forces consuming Filipino civilians, also reports of Japanese soldiers consuming each other. Conditions were desperate. American forces had cut all supply lines. Most cases occurred in mountain regions where Japanese remnants were hiding. Burma, 1944. Japanese retreat from Burma involved massive starvation. Estimated 20,000 Japanese soldiers died from disease and hunger. Reports of cannibalism among retreating forces. British forces documented finding evidence at abandoned Japanese camps. Not all reports were accurate. Some were propaganda, some were rumors. But enough were documented with physical evidence, testimony, and official records to establish that cannibalism occurred at significant scale in isolated Japanese units. The important distinction: most Japanese soldiers never resorted to cannibalism. Cannibalism occurred in extreme circumstances, among forces that had been completely abandoned. Compare this to American forces. No documented cases of American soldiers resorting to cannibalism, even in the most desperate situations. Bataan Death March, Japanese POW camps, isolated patrols. American soldiers never crossed that line. Why? Not because Americans were morally superior, but because American logistics ensured soldiers were never abandoned without supplies. Even in Japanese POW camps, where rations were minimal, American Red Cross packages provided some sustenance. The difference wasn't cultural, it was systematic. After the war, Japanese veterans struggled with what had happened on those isolated islands. Many suffered psychological trauma, not from combat. Japanese military culture prepared soldiers for combat, but from starvation and what it forced some men to do. Hiroshi Yamada, the soldier from New Guinea we met at the beginning, survived the war. He was repatriated to Japan in 1946. He lived until 1994. He rarely spoke about the war. When pressed, he'd say, "I survived. That's all that matters." But in 1989, a Japanese historian interviewed him for a documentary about the Pacific War. The historian asked about conditions on New Guinea. Hiroshi said, "We were abandoned. Our command gave us orders to hold positions but provided no supplies. We starved. We died. Some of us did things that should never be spoken about. The Americans call us monsters. Maybe we were, but we were monsters created by our own command structure. The Americans fed their soldiers. We were expected to die honorably. Many did, some didn't. I won't judge either group." The historian asked, "Do you think cannibalism was justified?" Hiroshi thought for a long time, then said, "Justified? No, never. But understandable, perhaps. When you're starving, truly starving, not just hungry but dying, your mind changes. Survival becomes everything. Morality becomes abstract. I never crossed that line, but I understand why some did. The real crime wasn't what starving soldiers did. The real crime was that our command let us starve." American veterans who witnessed evidence of Japanese cannibalism also struggled with what they'd seen. Captain Robert Morrison, the chaplain we mentioned earlier, wrote a memoir in 1952. He described finding the Japanese camp on Bougainville. "What struck me most wasn't the evidence of cannibalism itself, though that was horrible. What struck me was the contrast. We'd been half a mile away, eating 3 meals a day, receiving supplies by airdrop, getting mail from home. And these Japanese soldiers, enemy soldiers, yes, but still human beings, had been dying of starvation while watching our supply planes fly overhead. I don't excuse what they did. Cannibalism is wrong under any circumstances, but I understand it differently now. They weren't monsters. They were desperate men abandoned by their command. If American forces had been abandoned the same way, no supplies, no support, no hope, would we have acted differently? I'd like to think yes, but I'm not certain. Starvation does things to the human mind that can't be understood unless experienced. The lesson I took from that camp wasn't about Japanese barbarity. It was about the importance of logistics, about the necessity of supporting your soldiers, about the crime of giving orders without providing means to carry them out. The United States won the Pacific War partly because we never abandoned our soldiers. We fed them, we supplied them, we valued their lives. That's worth more than all the tactical brilliance in the world. Today, military logistics textbooks use Pacific War case studies to illustrate the importance of supply chains. The contrast between American and Japanese food logistics is cited as a key factor in American victory. But the cannibalism cases are rarely discussed in detail. They're too disturbing, too uncomfortable, too revealing about what happens when military systems fail. The few historians who do study these cases emphasize several points. 1. Cannibalism was not cultural. It occurred due to systemic failure, not Japanese culture. When Japanese forces had supplies, no cannibalism occurred. 2. Most Japanese soldiers never resorted to cannibalism. The majority died rather than cross that line. The cases that occurred were exceptional, not typical. 3. American logistics prevented similar situations, not because Americans were morally superior, but because American supply systems never completely failed. 4. The real crime was abandonment. The soldiers who committed cannibalism were victims of their own command structure. The crime was giving impossible orders without support. 5. This reveals the importance of logistics. Modern military doctrine emphasizes supply chains, specifically because of lessons learned in the Pacific War. In 2015, a joint US-Japan military history conference addressed Pacific War logistics. A Japanese historian presented research on starvation in isolated garrisons. An American historian presented research on supply drops. The conclusion was unanimous. The difference in food logistics was a decisive factor in the war's outcome. American forces maintained morale, strength, and combat effectiveness because they were well fed. Japanese forces deteriorated physically and psychologically due to starvation. One American general, speaking at the conference, said, "We didn't win the Pacific War because we were braver or smarter. We won because we never let our soldiers go hungry." That simple fact, reliable food supply, gave us an advantage that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. A Japanese scholar responded, "And we lost, partly because our military culture valued honor and obedience more than human life and practical logistics. Our soldiers were expected to achieve victory through willpower alone. When willpower wasn't enough, they died. Or worse. That's the lesson we must never forget." The two scholars shook hands, former enemies, now historians, united in understanding that the horrors of starvation and cannibalism in the Pacific weren't about savagery or civilization. They were about logistics, about command responsibility, about the fundamental necessity of supporting soldiers you order into combat. Japanese troops resorted to cannibalism because they were abandoned by their command structure. American troops received airdropped supplies because America's command structure prioritized logistics. That's the difference. Not culture, not morality, logistics. And that difference decided the Pacific War.